This is the Eyeball on our changing world. I'll be right back. Please stay with me. This is an interesting development here. Russia's advanced YesNM class nuclear submarine is headed for Cuba. A Russian flotilla, including a modern nuclear powered cruise missile submarine, is bound for Cuba for a rear deployment. Cuba or Cuban officials state that none of the Russian Navy vessels headed toward the Caribbean will be carrying nuclear weapons in an apparent effort to reduce tensions between Moscow and Washington. But the deployment once again reinforces renewed Russian interest in the operations in the wider region. So, what's wrong with that? Russia has all the right, and the Caribbean nations have all the right to renewed interest with their friends. And if the Cuban officials stated that these ships and nuclear submarines that are coming to Cuba are not carrying nuclear weapons, they are not lying. They are not like the West that lies and poke and try to control uh, and come up with some half truth. Why would they be going to Cuba with nuclear weapons? They're not preparing for war. But let's move on and hear how Washington is directing this kind of a conversation. In a statement yesterday, Cuba's Ministry of the Revolutionary Armed Forces confirmed that the advanced YesM class nuclear powered cruise missile submarine Kazan and three other Russian naval vessels, including the Project 22350 frigate Admiral Groskov, the Altanka Paskin, and the salvage tug Nikoli Chikar, will dock in the Cuban capital from June 12 to June 17. The Russian Navy frigate Admiral Groskov arrives in the port of Havana during a previous visit to Cuba on June the 24th, 2019. So this is not a new thing. It had happened before. Let me quote here. None of the vessels is carrying nuclear weapons. So their stopover in our country does not represent a threat to the region. Close quote. And that was said by the Cuban ministry. Quote, visit by naval units from other countries are a historical practice of the revolutionary government with nations that maintain relations of friendship and collaboration, the statement added, which is a fact. All countries, including the United States and its Western allies, they do that. This is nothing strange, nothing new, not a threat. The day before, the United States officials said that they expected Russian warships and aircraft to arrive in the Caribbean for a military exercise that they said would be part of Moscow's broader response to American support for Ukraine. In particular, President Joe Biden's decision to allow Ukraine to use United States provided weapons to strike inside Russia has angered the Kremlin. So what? Should the Kremlin be happy about this? No, the United States is fighting a proxy war. They are using Ukraine to attack Russia, right? To fight Russia. They are sending weapons from the United States, handing it over to a loose, um, dangerous country like Ukraine to fire in Russia itself, to kill Russian people, to damage Russian um, assets, fighting a proxy war that the United States cannot fight itself. And you are saying that The Russians should not be angry about this. Should they be jumping for joy? Of course, they're going to be going to their friends. That's what people do. When you have issues, when you have problems, and you need solutions, you talk to your buddies. You don't go to your enemies for solutions because they're all about eliminating you. Now let's keep going. The first in class, the first in class Russian Navy project 22350 frigate Admiral Groskev was sailing in the Caribbean. Well, I said that, you know, they did that in June. So it's not anything new. The same official said that the Russian deployment was not seen as threatening, but confirmed the United States Navy will monitor the maneuvers. So here's the first piece of information that this Washington-based writer is saying, that they don't see this move as threatening, but they're going to monitor the situation. But we're going to go through all of this and see how they go, whether or not they're going to be moving back and forth, because I think it probably should stop right here. If you don't see it as a threat, and you don't, you know, you're not worried about getting hurt, but you're going to monitor the situation. This should be it. Well, let's go on here. I quote: "We are not concerned by Russia's deployment, which pose no direct threat to the United States," close quote, the official said. Quote, "This is about Russia showing that it is still capable of some level of global power projection." So what's wrong with that? Russia is a superpower. And you said it poses no threat, but they're just showing up that they have something left. The Russian flotilla may be small in size overall, but it's also larger than previous such developments. Last July, for example, the Russian Navy sent the training class ship Porevkov into Havana for a 4-day visit. The nuclear powered cruise missile submarine Kazan at its base in the Northern Fleet in May 2021, Ministry of Defense of Russia. Significant too is the fact that the Kazan and the Admiral Koskov are notably modern and capable assets. Oh, I mean, what do you mean by capable assets? Of course, they want to send their modern submarine and ships up into Caribbean region. They probably want to show their friends some of the goodies that they have. Both the Kazan and the Admiral Graskov are equipped with vertical launch system silos that can accommodate calibrate long-range cruise missiles, which can be used for anti-ship strike and land attack, as well as Onyx supersonic anti-ship cruise missiles. Additionally, the Admiral Graskov was the first Russian Navy warship to operationally deploy with the new Zyklon hypersonic cruise missiles, at least according to official Russian claims. The frigate Admiral Groskov, Minister of Defense of Russia, unlike previous generation Russian SNGs, the Yasen class and especially the advanced Yasen MS are for more versatile than just cruise missile platforms, able to operate as general purpose attack boats, as well as intelligence gatherers, and potentially as special missions platforms. A measure of the capability of these submarines was provided by the United States Air Force General Glenn Van Heck, the head of U.S. Northern Command and United States Canadian Northern American Aerospace Defense Command, who described the ascent boats as being nearly on a par with the U.S. Navy types in terms of quietness. He added that this growing class of submarines will soon present a persistent threat to the American homeland, unlike any before. While the United States and the Cuban authorities are downplaying the Russian deployment in terms of the threat that it poses, Moscow has warned that it could take, and I quote, asymmetrical steps, unquote, elsewhere in the world in response to Washington's backing of Ukraine. In particular, President Vladimir Putin has said that Russia could supply long range weapons to regions around the world where they could be used for a strike against Western targets. Well, that is only fair. I mean, if the United States is going to create this proxy war, sending advanced weapons to Ukraine to strike deep inside Russia, Russia is a superpower. They have the same right to hand over weapons that can strike Western countries. It's a friendly business going on here. I mean, America has no right to say, well, we can arm any country we want to arm to destroy Russia. Well, Russia does not have a right to fight back. They should just keep their hands in their pocket and say, oh, well, it happened. No, that's not how it works. One such region could well be Cuba. Oh, here we go. Based on the historically close relationship between Havana and Moscow. Last month, Putin hosted Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel during the annual May 9 Victory Day military parade on Red Square. In general, ties between Diaz-Canel and Putin have become deeper since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Well, you know, Venezuela has to maintain relationship with its friend Russia because America and its buddies in the West had crippled the economy of Venezuela. I mean, sanctions upon sanctions upon sanctions. So they're going to need some, Putin to help them out from time to time. That's a normal thing. Russian President Vladimir Putin meets with Cuban counterpart Miguel Diaz-Canel on the sidelines of Victory Day celebrations in Moscow on May 9, 1924. In Soviet times, Cuba was an important ally of Moscow, and deployments by Russian Navy flotillas, as well as long-range maritime patrol aircraft, were commonplace. The deployment of Soviet nuclear weapons on the island triggered the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. So here we are again, where the Russians were placing long-range missiles on Cuban soil rather, 1962. And America got real crazy about it and said, no, this can't work. You are placing weapons really just minutes away from hitting America if they should be fired. We can't have that. Russia is saying, if you put nuclear weapons in Ukraine, we as Russians can't have that because it's just minutes away. We don't have enough time to respond. You could eliminate us. Russia has been saying that since 2008. talking to America, talking to friendly or unfriendly Western countries. No one would listen. So this is not really an invasion of Ukraine. I mean, Russia, President Vladimir Putin said, this is a special military operation. And if you look at the history and the development and the going on since 2008, where Ukraine has been antagonizing um, Russia and killing off Russian people, and Putin has been talking about this thing. And the West, NATO has been creeping up slowly, slowly, slowly to the Russian border. So the man has to take take some action. So this is not an invasion of a southern, I mean, a sovereign country. It is it's a defensive mode. You got to do something, but they don't want Russia to do anything. No, they should just put their hand in their pocket and say, well, you know, the West and America can encircle us. They can put nuclear weapons wherever they want. Is this whole, you know, ruling the world attitude? More recently, Venezuela has also enjoyed close relations with Moscow, which is all right, including on a military level. Why not? Earlier this week, a senior United States official suggested that the current Russian Navy deployment might also include a port of call in Venezuela. Nothing is wrong with that. Cuba is not far away from Venezuela. Russia is thousands of miles away from both countries. So if you call on your buddy in Cuba on your way home, you call on Venezuela, your friend also. So, quote, we are expecting that Russia will temporarily send combat naval vessels to the Caribbean region, and these ships will likely conduct port calls in Cuba and possibly Venezuela. There may also be some aircraft deployments or flights in the region. Close quote. What's wrong with that? That's the United States speaking. Also notable, perhaps, is the fact that the United States Coast Guard just released official photos showing operations involving the United States Coast Guard Legend class cutter Stone in the Atlantic Ocean, including working alongside the aligned Burke class destroyers. The Stone is also seen during maneuvers with the Canadian. The photos taken aboard the Cutter Stone date from between June 3rd and June 6th in the Second Fleet area of operations and document what are described as, quote, maritime stability and security operations in the region. There's no issue there. I don't see why you need to be operating in this region as if you want to go to war with people who are just visiting friends. While there's nothing to suggest, and listen to this, while there's nothing to suggest the operations are specifically related to the upcoming Russian Navy development, the timing of their release, at least, is interesting, with the Russian flotilla due to visit Havana next week. Clearly, the Pentagon is monitoring the situation, and some kind of response is to be expected. What kind of response is America talking about? Is to be expected. All right, so you're monitoring the situation. All right, so you don't trust Russia visiting their friend, Cuba or Venezuela. So you're monitoring the situation, and some kind of a response is expected. So what are you going to do? I mean, you have blockade Cuba, for decades, you know. Now, I quote, we should expect more of this activity going forward, although we know these deployments incur a cost on the Russian Navy, which is struggling to maintain readiness and conduct deployments with an aged fleet, U.S. officials said of the upcoming Russian visit to Cuba. The Kazan underway on the surface, Ministry of Defense, Russia. This last point is an important one, and it remains to be seen whether Russia will scale back its future deployments to the Caribbean or whether the current one is indicative of a new and more robust posture. I mean, this is not about posturing. I mean, what the Americans are suggesting here is that Russia is posturing its military force, its fighting capabilities, and this is a threat. I mean, the guys, they would be carrying nuclear weapons. If they were preparing to fight a war or to hit America, they certainly would have to carry nuclear weapons, and they're not doing that. They don't. Russia doesn't want to have a war in the Caribbean or with America. Whatever the case, the United States will keep a close eye on the movements of the Russian vessels as well as any other additional military activities, which could involve more extensive drills in the Caribbean region. Yeah. So this is the attitude. Yeah, they're speaking out of one side of their mouth. In the first place, they're telling us that Washington is saying to us that it's not really a threat. They are not concerned about Russia visiting Cuba. While on the other hand, they are saying, well, we are monitoring them. We have to take some action, some future action. So if they are not a threat, what kind of other future action are you going to be taking? I mean, both can be true. I don't see the logic here. The idea here is to bully, threaten, and try to sabotage relationship between Russia and its friends. Russia has no intention, like the Europeans and Americans, to go into the Caribbean to rob, to steal, to enslave, which is a pattern of Western dominance and behavior. Russia usually come forward to help, and support these revolutions so that people can have food on their table, proper housing, good education, great health care. The West is not interested in that. It's about dominating, keeping people down, so on and so forth. Now, this is the eyeballer on our changing world.